I thought the public humiliation and the slap were the worst of it. But when I saw the spray paint on the wall of the home I built, I finally understood my father's love was a weapon, and I was his target. I'm Elias Vance. If you saw me driving my truck around Austin, heading into my smart home, you'd probably think I have it all figured out. 35 years old, senior software engineer, a comfortable life I built from the ground up. And that house, man, that house wasn't just four walls and a roof. It was my fortress. It was the physical proof that I won the game I was forced to play alone. But let me tell you something about family sometimes. The people closest to you are the only ones who can truly destroy you. And that's exactly what my parents and my brother tried to do. Listen, if you've ever had a family member demand you sacrifice your hard-earned success, if you've ever felt like the bank account they tap but never the son they cherish, you know this feeling. You know that hollow ache of knowing your worth to them is purely transactional. If that's your story, hit that subscribe button right now. Because this channel isn't just about my toxic family drama. It's about setting boundaries and finding the courage to walk away from people who demand your life in exchange for their approval. I promise you, by the end of this story, you'll know exactly what you need to do to finally set yourself free. Now, let me tell you how my dad demanded I give my house to my brother. It all started just a week before Thanksgiving, which, ironically, is supposed to be about gratitude. I had just wired the last $150,000 to clear the crypto debt my younger brother, Drew, had accumulated. $150,000. That's not a car. That's a down payment on a small building in Manhattan. That was money I busted my ass for, working 70-hour weeks since I graduated college. My mother's voice on the phone was the usual blend of hysteria and manipulation. "Elias, please come to dinner. We need to talk about Drew's stability." Stability. That's the code word they always used for Elias. Sacrifice your life again. I drove over to their place in Tarrytown, that manicured suburb where the grass is always greener and the hypocrisy is always thicker. The air in the dining room was heavy. My father, Robert Vance, was sitting at the head of the table, his face stern, holding a glass of scotch like a gavel. My mother, Alice, was nervously adjusting the centerpiece. Drew, of course, was absent. He's always absent when the bill comes due. They didn't even bother with small talk. "Elias," my father started, his voice a low growl that always sent a chill down my spine. "Thank you for clearing the debt. It saved the family name." He said that with zero warmth, as if thanking a highly efficient cleaning service. Then came the second shoe. My mother leaned forward, her eyes pleading but also containing that steely expectation I knew so well. "But that's not enough. Honey, Drew needs a clean start. He needs a stable, secure place to get back on his feet. Your house, your Austin home is perfect." I felt the blood drain from my face. My house. The one I designed the security for. The one where I run my entire business. The one I poured my sweat, anxiety, and every spare dollar into. "Mom, Dad, what are you talking about?" I asked, trying to keep my voice even. My father slammed his glass down. "Don't play stupid. Elias, Drew is moving in with you. He needs your guest suite and your high-speed connection to work on his next venture. You're hardly ever there anyway. Always traveling for these tech things." I stared at them, and it wasn't sadness I felt. It was a sudden, crystal-clear realization of betrayal. They didn't see me as a son. They saw me as a resource. I paid the debt. "Dad, I did that for you, but my house is my sanctuary. It is my business. I will not compromise my professional life, my security, or my peace for Drew's latest venture." I said the last word with all the derision I felt. My mother immediately dissolved into dramatic tears. "How can you be so selfish? Your brother is suffering, and you cling to things my father just glared. You will do this. Elias, or you will regret the day you turned your back on your family. I walked out that night, the threat hanging in the air. I knew I couldn't accept it, but I didn't know that my refusal would escalate the situation to physical violence, that the slap was coming, that my father, the man who was supposed to protect me, would choose to break my spirit in front of a dozen witnesses. I didn't know that blood on my lip was the least of the damage they would inflict. The humiliation I was about to face at Thanksgiving was just the beginning of a deeper, darker betrayal. I wish I could tell you the slap was an anomaly, a single moment of rage from a stressed-out father. But it wasn't. It was the predictable climax of a story that started when my brother, Drew, was born. To understand why I said no to their demand for my house, you have to understand that I've been saying yes to their demands for my entire life, and it never bought me an ounce of real love. Look, I was 3 when Drew arrived, old enough to remember when I was the center of the universe. Then, suddenly, I was the accessory. Drew was the sun, and I was just the orbit. My parents didn't see it as favoritism. They called it nurturing potential. Drew, with his delicate constitution and his sensitive artist soul, needed constant protection and endless resources. I, on the other hand, was always the resilient one, the sensible one, the kid who could just handle it. That meant Drew got every new toy, every fashionable piece of clothing, and every pass on responsibility. When he was 10, he smashed my father's prized vintage tennis racket against the garage wall during a fit because he lost a video game. My father didn't yell. He just sighed, looked at Drew with concern, and told my mother, "He's got that Vance competitive fire. We need to channel it." Later that week, he bought Drew a new top-of-the-line gaming console. Me, when I accidentally scratched the kitchen table putting together a model airplane. I got a week of grounding and a 20-minute lecture on respecting property. The lesson wasn't about the table. It was about my value being tied to my perfection. Drew was allowed to be flawed, chaotic, and destructive. I wasn't. This pattern cemented itself by high school. When Drew turned 16, he didn't just get a car. He got a brand new cherry red convertible. It was flashy, loud, constantly needed repairs because he drove like a maniac. But it was his, a symbol of unconditional love. My father, Robert, handed him the keys with this huge, proud smile. When I turned 17 and asked about getting a car to drive to my after-school job at the local library, my father sat me down, handed me a list of used Fords, and said, "If you want independence, Elias, you earn it. It builds character." That's how they always framed it. Drew was given success. I was given character. I didn't resent the hard work. I resented the blatant double standard. I spent my junior and senior years saving every penny from the library gig, bussing tables on weekends, just to buy a beat-up Ford Escort. When I finally parked that ugly, reliable machine in the driveway, my mother's only comment was, "Well, at least it's reliable. Elias, you know how your brother's convertible is always giving us trouble. No pride. No recognition of the sheer grind it took. Just a comparison that benefited Drew. The gap didn't close, it became a chasm when college rolled around. Drew, predictably, chose an expensive private university 3 states away. My parents happily bankrolled the entire 4-year spree tuition, a luxury off-campus apartment so he wouldn't have to deal with the common folk, and a staggering monthly allowance. He treated it like a 5-year vacation, changing majors 3 times, and frequently calling home to complain about his professors being too demanding. My parents would commiserate with him, sending him care packages and extra cash. Me, I applied for every scholarship under the sun and chose a public state school close to home. Knowing I couldn't afford the other option, I secured a partial academic scholarship. But for the rest, I worked 3 jobs waiting tables, delivering pizza until midnight, and tutoring, all while pursuing my degree in software engineering. My parents, they told their friends I was developing character and resourcefulness. They never once offered a dime towards my tuition, not even when I was hospitalized briefly with exhaustion during finals week. I called home after I got out of the hospital, frail and running on fumes. I just wanted to hear, "We love you, son. Take care of yourself." My mother, Alice, barely paused her description of a new area rug she was buying. She quickly interrupted me to ask if I had remembered to check on Drew's dry cleaning, which he had accidentally left at their house before driving back to his expensive apartment. "It's important, Elias," she said, her tone suddenly firm. I hung up the phone and realized my well-being, my physical breakdown, was an inconvenience. But Drew's forgotten laundry was a family crisis. They saw my sacrifices not as a burden they had placed on me, but as proof of my superiority, a cruel trick of logic that absolved them of any guilt. "If Elias is so strong, so resourceful, why should we help him if Drew is so sensitive, so fragile? We must protect him from everything." I was the silent, efficient machine, designed to produce success without demanding emotional reciprocation. By the time I graduated with honors and immediately landed a high-paying job in tech, they had already normalized my role as the family's de facto emergency fund. Drew was still bouncing between ventures, that disastrous organic dog food service, a quick dive into being a social media influencer, and eventually, the full commitment to the disastrous crypto pump and dump scheme that led to the $150,000 hole. With every catastrophic failure of his, my mother's devotion to him intensified. With every success of mine, their demands on me grew bolder. They saw my thriving career, my six-figure salary, not as a source of pride, but as a vast, untapped reserve they had a right to. I never articulated it out loud, but deep inside, a quiet rage had been building. I kept hoping that one day, one single day, my father would look at the architecture of my life, the sleepless nights, the relentless work ethic, the absolute financial independence, and say, "We see you, son. We are proud." But that day never came. I didn't know then that the ultimate test of their loyalty, the final, brutal exchange, was just around the corner. I thought I was paying off a debt. I was wrong. I was paying the price for daring to achieve what they always wanted their golden child to be. The payment, as I was about to find out, was the destruction of my sanctuary. After college, I didn't stop running. That need to prove I was worthy, that I was more than just the silent background character, fueled me. I threw myself into the tech world. Forget the traditional career ladder. I was building a rocket ship fueled by spite and ambition. I lived on microwave meals and 3 hours of sleep, taking on every high-stress project, every insane deadline, and every dollar I saved felt like a brick I was laying down to build a wall between myself and their toxic dependency. The biggest, most tangible symbol of my victory was the Austin smart home. When I finally bought it at age 32, I didn't get a loan big enough to choke a horse. I had enough cash for a substantial down payment, all earned, all mine. It was modern, minimalist, with huge windows that let the Texas light pour in. And yes, the security system was top of the line, a cynical but necessary investment in keeping my life private. That house wasn't about showing off. It was about sanctuary. It was the only place in the world where I could breathe without feeling their judgment or their entitlement pressing down on me. But the moment I achieved that independence, the demands escalated. It started subtly. My mother would call, not to ask how I was doing, but to casually mention that Drew needed a reliable sedan because his convertible was constantly in the shop. Couldn't I just co-sign a loan? I said no. Then it was small. Non-refundable donations to Drew's disastrous ventures, a few thousand here, a few thousand there. I paid those, not because I believed in his ridiculous ideas, but because it felt cheaper than the emotional warfare of saying no. I was trying to buy peace, and I kept upping the price, thinking I'd eventually hit the magic number. The real crisis, the one that led to the demand for my house, hit 2 months ago. Drew, in his infinite golden child wisdom, had plunged into a highly leveraged crypto scheme. He told my parents it was guaranteed wealth, It wasn't. It was $150,000 down the drain. And this time, it wasn't just a friendly bank calling. It was the kind of people who don't send polite letters. The terror in my mother's voice when she called wasn't fake. She was genuinely afraid of the consequences the Vance name would face. "Elias, they came to the door. They were wearing leather jackets. Your father had to pretend he didn't know where Drew was. They threatened to expose us." My blood ran cold. It wasn't about Drew's stupidity anymore. It was about protecting my parents, who, despite everything, were still my parents. I didn't want to see them terrified in their suburban fortress. I didn't want their carefully constructed facade to crumble because of Drew's recklessness. I sat alone in my Austin home, staring out the vast windows, feeling the walls of my sanctuary close in. I knew paying the debt wasn't for Drew. It was a ransom for their peace. I wired the $150,000 to the collection agency immediately. Not even talking to Drew. I did it quickly, silently, swallowing my fury like bitter medicine. I thought that was the end of it. I thought I had paid the ultimate price, that I was finally free to go back to my life, my work, my peace. I truly believed I had bought my way out of the drama. I was naive. They called me over for that dinner right before Thanksgiving, the one where my father thanked me without warmth and my mother started crying. That's when the second demand came. Drew needed to move into my house. "It's not an option, Elias," my father had barked, his eyes cold and commanding. "He needs stability. Your guest suite is sitting empty. You're hardly ever there anyway, traveling for these tech things." The casual dismissal of my entire life, my career, my security, my solitude as a mere tech thing felt like a physical blow. They weren't asking. They were asserting ownership over my life's hardest-won victory. They saw the money as a debt I owed them for existing, and the house as an extension of that debt. The money hadn't bought me peace. It had only entitled them to demand the key to my cage. My internal monologue was screaming. I worked 3 jobs while Drew was sunbathing. I designed the security system that keeps my intellectual property safe. I poured every hour of my 20s into this freedom. Yet, all I said was, "I paid the debt, Dad. I fulfilled my duty. But my house is my sanctuary. I will not risk my professional life, my security, or my peace for Drew's latest venture." I felt the tension coil in the room. I knew I had crossed a line, but for the first time in my life, I wasn't backing down. I was choosing self-preservation over filial piety. I thought I was buying time for the main event. But I was wrong. The main event was already underway, and it was scheduled to explode right in the middle of our family's day of gratitude. The slap wasn't a spontaneous outburst. It was a detonation. It happened 3 days later, on Thanksgiving Day. Irony. Right. The day dedicated to gratitude became the day I was publicly humiliated and stripped of every last thread of hope I held on to about my family. I drove back to Tarrytown for dinner, feeling sick to my stomach. I'd spent the last 72 hours stewing, the silence from my parents a clear indicator they expected me to show up, apologize, and hand over the keys. I wasn't going to do any of those things. I was going to stand my ground. The house was packed. Aunts, uncles, and cousins, all the periphery relatives who only surface when there's a free meal and drama on the menu. They were all sitting around the massive dining table, which was overloaded with turkey, cranberry sauce, and enough passive aggression to power a small city. Drew was there too, sitting across from me, looking smug and entitled in a new jacket I guarantee my parents bought him. He avoided my gaze, which only confirmed his guilt in all of this. Dinner started off fake nice, whispers, forced laughter, the whole suburban circus. But about halfway through the turkey, my mother looked around the table, dabbed her perfectly dry eyes with a napkin, and launched her attack. "Elias!" "Honey," she began, her voice loud enough to silence the room. "We were just talking about your little brother. He's going through such a tough time. It's terrible that he has to start his new venture with this cloud of uncertainty hanging over him." My stomach churned. Uncertainty I cleared $150,000 of his criminal debt, and they called it uncertainty. My father Robert nodded gravely. Elias, we are still waiting for you to honor your commitment to the family. What's the problem? You have that big, beautiful house in Austin. It's practically empty. Why are you clinging so tightly to material things when your brother needs stability? Aunt Carol, a woman who hasn't worked a day in her life but loves judging mine, chimed in. Well, Elias, your mother is right. Brothers should support each other. It's a small ask for someone who's clearly done so well for himself. The air thickened. I felt the familiar heat rising in my face. But this time, I didn't let it become shame. I let it become resolve. I put my fork down slowly, making sure the clink was loud enough. I honored my commitment. I said, my voice quiet but firm, cutting through the murmurs. I paid the debt. I did that to protect Mom and Dad from the consequences of Drew's actions. But my house is my home and my business headquarters. I am not compromising my professional life or my security for Drew's latest venture. He is 32. He needs to take responsibility for his failures, not move into my success. My father's face went scarlet. The veins in his neck popped out, and his jaw locked. He saw me, truly saw me, for the first time not as a resource, but as a challenge to his absolute authority. How dare you lecture us on responsibility, he roared, his voice echoing off the vaulted ceiling. You have this Silicon Valley arrogance. You think you're better than us. You refuse to lift a finger for your flesh and blood just because you have some easy tech money. It wasn't easy money, I shouted back, finally snapping. It was 3 jobs while Drew was partying. It was years of sacrifice that neither of you ever acknowledged. You're demanding ownership over my life's victory because you failed to teach your favorite son a single lesson about consequences. That was it. I broke the code. I exposed their failure as parents. Before I could even blink, my father shot out of his chair. He didn't just slap me. He shoved me violently backward. I stumbled, my shoulder hitting the heavy antique display cabinet behind me. The glass shattered with a deafening crash, scattering sharp pieces across the marble floor. The sharp sting of the glass tearing my jacket sleeve was nothing compared to the shock. Silence. The sound of the glass shards still tinkling was the only thing I could hear. I stood there, frozen, looking at my father. His eyes weren't just angry. They were cold, devoid of any paternal connection. And then I saw Drew. He wasn't rushing to help. He was leaning back in his chair, a clear, sickening smirk plastered across his face. He actually looked satisfied. I walked out. I didn't say goodbye. I didn't grab my coat. I just walked over the glass, past the horrified gasps of my mother and the relatives, and out the front door. The shame was a physical weight, but beneath it, something cold and sharp began to form the absolute certainty that they were all my enemy. The next morning, the betrayal went from emotional to criminal. I drove back to Austin, emotionally drained but determined. I pulled up to my street, and that's when I saw it. The massive plate glass wall of my home office, the one I used for all my secure video calls, wasn't shattered, but it was vandalized. Big, jagged streaks of black spray paint covered the glass. The words were simple, vicious, and aimed at the core of my identity. Share out. Sell out. My blood turned to ice. This wasn't just some random act. As I approached the door, I noticed the wires leading to my high-tech security camera were cleanly severed. Someone had known exactly how to disable my system. I stood there, looking at the violation of my sanctuary, and I knew who was behind it. Drew wasn't just spiteful. He was a destructive force. My parents had refused to help me, and now their golden child had escalated their demand for my house into an act of war. I was safe inside my smart home, but I was living in a cage, I knew exactly who held the key. And it wasn't me. I spent 3 days inside my violated house, sleeping on the couch near the front door, staring at the black spray paint that screamed, "Share out." My mind was running a continuous loop, the sound of the glass shattering, the cold look in my father's eyes, and that sickening smirk on Drew's face. It wasn't about the money anymore. It was about control. They wanted to see me broken, living under their thumb, because that's the only way they felt powerful. I tried calling the non-emergency police line. They came. They took a report about the vandalism, and they said, "Without clear camera footage or witnesses, there's not much we can do, sir." I knew Drew and his shady associates had been smart enough to cut the wires outside the frame. The system I built to protect myself was useless against an enemy who knew all my weak spots. My parents. They called me the next day, not to check on the damage, but to yell, "How dare you blame Drew for your problems? You're paranoid. Elias, you're trying to destroy your brother's reputation because he's finally trying to be successful." Their gaslighting was so blatant, so absolute, that it broke something vital inside me. I hung up the phone and realized I was completely and utterly alone in this war. My fortress had become a cage, and the air in Austin suddenly felt poisonous. I needed to escape the blast radius. I needed to talk to the only man in my family who ever truly saw me, my grandfather. Pops Arthur Vance. Pops lived a world away, not in the manicured suburbs of Terrytown, but on an old, quiet ranch in rural Montana. He was an old-school guy, a master builder who focused on integrity, not on appearances. I packed a single duffel bag, shut down my servers, taped cardboard over the vandalized window, and started driving west. 30 hours on the road, with nothing but the highway lines and my racing thoughts. Every mile felt like a layer of skin I was shedding. When I finally arrived at Pops's ranch, the contrast was immediate. No smart home sensors, just the smell of pine and damp earth. No sterile white walls, just weathered wood and the sound of wind chimes. Pops, a tall, rugged man in his late 70s, met me at the porch. He didn't ask why I was there. He just looked at my haunted eyes and said, "Come in. Elias, there's coffee." We sat by his stone fireplace. I didn't know how to start, but once I did, the words tumbled out the years of being the scapegoat. The $150,000 debt, the public shove at Thanksgiving, and finally, the deliberate, targeted vandalism of my Austin home. I told him how they demanded I give up my sanctuary, my professional security, and how I felt like I had nowhere left to go. Pops listened, not interrupting once. He just sat there, stroking his thick silver beard, his eyes sharp and clear. When I finished, the silence stretched, heavy but strangely comforting. Then, Pops looked directly at me. "Elias," he said, his voice low and firm, like a tree trunk. "I know that feeling. It's the feeling of realizing the price tag they put on their love is your entire life." I looked at him, surprised. "What do you mean, Pops?" He leaned forward. He told me that decades ago, when the Vance family fortune was being built before my father inherited the corporate structure, Pops was the designated heir. But he had wanted to build things with his hands. He wanted to live a simple, honest life. And he married my grandmother, who wasn't from the right family. Your grandfather, my father, called me ambitious, but not in a good way. They told me I had to conform, give up the ranch idea, and get back into the city to secure the legacy. When I refused, they cut me off completely, disinherited me. They told me I had failed the family. Pops looked me right in the eye. They tried to put a leash on me, just like they're trying to put one on you. They couldn't control my success, so they tried to control my location. They tried to make my biggest achievement, my freedom, feel like my greatest failure. His words didn't just explain my family, they explained my entire life. I had been living through a repeating family pattern. Pop stood up and walked to the window, looking out over the vast, empty Montana fields. He turned back, and his gaze was an absolute mountain of wisdom and resolve. He spoke the words that cut through 30 years of my programming. That house is a cage. Elias, burn the cage down. I froze. Sell it. The house was my victory flag. Pops anticipated my protest. It's not your fortress anymore. It's a target. It's a tether they use to reel you back in. They demand the key because they know if they own your space, they own your peace. You earned that house with integrity. That integrity is still inside you. Burn the cage down. Elias, sell the house. Use the capital to be truly free. And start your new company from here. They can't attack what they can't find. And they can't control what you willingly let go of. In that moment, I realized the house was just an object. My independence was a mindset. I picked up my phone, logged into my bank, and started the process of contacting a remote realtor. I was letting go of the target, and for the first time in my life, I felt the chilling, exhilarating taste of true freedom. The cage was coming down. Pops's words, "That house is a cage. Burn the cage down," were the only permission slip I ever truly needed. Within 48 hours of arriving in Montana, I had the Austin property listed with a remote agency. I told the realtor I needed a fast, clean sale. I didn't care about maximizing the profit. I cared about maximizing my freedom. But selling the cage wasn't the only thing I had to burn. While the realtor began fielding offers, I went through my banking apps. For years, I had quietly shouldered my parents' financial burdens, their annual vacation fund, the property taxes they forgot to pay, the premium insurance on their house, and even the ridiculous lease payment for Drew's latest impulse car. I never did it for thanks. I did it because I was afraid of what would happen if the facade cracked. Sitting there at Pops's old oak desk, I canceled every single automatic transfer. Every one. The moment I hit the confirm button, I felt a jolt of pure, terrifying liberation. That was the sound of the Vance family ATM running out of cash. The call started immediately. Of course, not about the house sale yet, that was still under wraps, but about the sudden halt of their funding. My mother called first, her voice going from confused to panicked. "Elias, what happened to the transfers? The cleaning lady hasn't been paid. Your father's insurance bill just bounced. Did you forget to set up the new bank link?" "No, Mom," I said, my voice steady, surprising even myself. "I didn't forget. I canceled them all. Permanently." The silence on the other end was electric. It was the sound of their carefully constructed safety net dissolving. "You can't do that! We need that! We rely on that!" she shrieked. It was never I need or I rely. It was always we. The collective shield of their entitlement. "I need my own life." "Mom," I replied. "I paid off Drew's $150,000 debt. That was the last payment you will ever receive from me. You need to manage your own finances now." She hung up in a fit of gasping sobs, but I knew those tears weren't for me. They were for the loss of the resource. My father called next. His voice wasn't panicked. It was pure, chilling fury. "You pathetic child, how dare you destabilize us? You're wealthy. This is an insult. You will reactivate those funds immediately, or you are cut off from this family forever." I laughed, a dry, bitter sound that shocked him into silence. "Cut off, Dad. You shoved me into a glass cabinet for protecting my own property. You allowed your spoiled son to vandalize my home. You cut me off years ago. The only thing you're threatening to cut off now is the lie that you ever cared." I hung up before he could launch another missile. The true confrontation, the final showdown, happened 2 weeks later. The house sale went through cash offer. Quick closing. It was done. The Austin cage was gone, replaced by a massive wire transfer in my new private account. My parents, having finally learned about the sale from a shocked relative, showed up in Montana. They drove that long, agonizing distance to Pops's ranch. their faces pale with rage and desperation. They burst into the living room, ignoring the peaceful crackle of the fireplace. Robert Vance looked completely out of place in his expensive Tarrytown jacket, standing on the rugged wood floor. "You sold the house!" my father yelled, his voice strained. "You sold the family asset that was meant for Drew's stability! How could you do this to your brother?" "It was my asset, Robert," I corrected him, using his first name for the first time. "And it was my decision. Drew had his chance at stability, and he chose crypto schemes and loan sharks." My mother was pleading. "Anthony, please, we are struggling. The bills are piling up and the collectors are back after Drew, worse than ever. If you don't help, we will lose everything." Before I could speak, Pops Arthur Vance, who had been sitting silently in his armchair, stood up. His presence was immediately commanding. He didn't yell. He just spoke with the calm authority of a man who built his life with true grit. "Enough! Alice! Enough! Robert!" Pops's voice was low, but it stopped them dead in their tracks. "You drove 1,000 miles to blame Elias for the consequences of your own bad parenting. You didn't raise sons. You raised a burden and an ATM." My father tried to interrupt. "Dad, this is family business. This is my family too. And I will not sit here while you trample the one child who chose responsibility." Pops interrupted, his gaze unyielding. "You failed to set boundaries. You enabled Drew's destruction. And now you demand Elias sacrifice his entire life to keep your illusion alive. Elias owes you nothing more than the air he breathes." They were silenced. Pops's defense was the ultimate vindication, a moment of justice that wiped away decades of internalized shame. But the final, brutal twist of the knife came the next day. I got a call from Aunt Carol, the same one who had judged me at Thanksgiving. But now her tone was hushed, almost fearful. "Elias," she whispered, "you need to know. Drew, he messed up again. The loan sharks didn't just come for the money. They forced him to sign over his future inheritance, the part your parents intended for him. They have him legally bound. Your mother is hysterical. They are truly ruined." Drew had destroyed himself, not just with the $150,000 I paid, but with new unpayable debts. He wasn't just sinking, he had forfeited his entire future. And my parents, without the ATM to bail them out, were forced to watch the consequences unfold alone. The fall of their little empire was complete. The fallout from the confrontation with my parents and the news about Drew's irreversible financial ruin, the forfeiture of his entire future inheritance, didn't bring me joy. It brought silence. The silence of finality. It wasn't the catharsis I'd fantasized about. It was just the quiet, heavy realization that the game was finally over. The empire they had built on manipulation and favoritism had imploded, and I was on the outside. Safe. Living on Pops's ranch was the deepest detox I'd ever experienced. The Austin smart home had been a monument to my drive. The ranch was a sanctuary for my soul. I traded the sterile white walls and high-tech sensors for the vast, uncompromising landscape of Montana. The air was clean, and the only demands were the rhythm of nature and the wisdom of Pops. I took the capital from the house sale and officially launched Boundary Builders Tech. It wasn't just a clever name, it was a mission statement. I started small, focusing on remote consulting, designing secure, efficient systems for companies that valued integrity and clear communication, the things my family never had. Pops, true to his word, used his old-school network and introduced me to his contacts in construction and real estate. They trusted him, and by extension, they trusted me. The business thrived, not just because I was good at coding, but because I was free. The crippling weight of obligation was gone. I could focus entirely on building something that was mine, untainted by their demands. I felt a level of peace I hadn't realized was missing. I was no longer Elias Vance, the family ATM. I was Elias Vance, the man who built his own ground. My parents tried to call for months, sometimes to scream, sometimes to beg, They'd send emails filled with accusations. You are heartless. You destroyed your brother. You are not welcome in this family. But the words no longer had power. I let them go straight to the spam filter, understanding that their communication wasn't an attempt to reconcile. It was an attempt to re-establish control. I didn't block them, because watching them flail and fail was a necessary reminder of the chaos I had escaped. I learned the biggest lesson from Pops, sitting by the fireplace, watching the wood burn down to embers. He told me, "Elias, they taught you that your value was determined by what you gave. But the truth is, your true value is determined by what you refuse to give. You refuse to give them your peace. You refuse to give them your freedom. That is the highest form of self-respect." That was the key to my triumph. The house was just an object, but selling it was the moment I chose my self-respect over my duty. I chose my future over their past. I chose the quiet solitude of the ranch over the toxic chaos of their empire. I still carry the scars, the phantom sting of the slap, the memory of Drew's smirk. But those scars don't define me anymore. They remind me. They remind me that family doesn't always mean love, and that sometimes the most loving thing you can do for yourself is walk away and build your own family on a foundation of respect, not debt. If you've listened to this whole story, you know the feeling. You know what it's like to be the responsible one, the silent one, the one everyone takes from until you're empty. Let me tell you something vital. You are not obligated to burn your life to keep others warm. The only thing you truly owe is your own peace. My dad demanded I give my house to my brother. I said no, and he did the unthinkable. But in doing so, he set me free. If this story resonated with the burden you're carrying, I need you to do two things right now. First, please like this video and comment below. Tell me what is the one boundary you need to set today to take back your peace. I read every comment, and your story matters. Second, and this is the most important, hit that subscribe button. Don't just watch. Join the community of people who refuse to be defined by their trauma. When you subscribe, you get the tools, the insights, and the validation you need to finally break free and start building your own empire. Do it now, for your future self. I am Elias Vance. I burned the cage down, and now the phoenix is rising. I hope you find the courage to light your match, too.